Good afternoon, everyone. Let's start. This is a very busy week in Coimbra. We had in the beginning of the week 2 days with that ended with a PhD that our faculty attributed to the president of Italy. And today we have two big events in Coimbra. One is the rally, and the other one is this one here. On behalf of Professor José Manuel Mendes, the Dean of the Faculty of Economics of the University of Coimbra, I would like to welcome all the students, professors, guests, and in particular the two speakers for being here. Thank you all. It's very, very nice to see a room as full as this one. So, this is edition number 8 of this Cátedra OIT, which in Cátedra years probably means that is already an adult Cátedra, with all the responsibility associated to that. Special thanks to Professor Hermes for keeping this Cátedra not only alive, but also full of life. This Cátedra is a dynamic platform for dialogue and collaboration with International Labour Organization, bringing together specialists to address key labor themes and the future of work. The Cátedra OIT is very important for both the Faculty of Economics and the University of Coimbra, and is an asset for several doctoral programs in sociology that will soon be reaccredited by A3S. In particular, it is an asset for the doctoral program in sociology coordinated by Professor Hermes, Labor Relations, Social Inequalities and Trade Unionism, whose intersection with the themes of the Cátedra OIT is far from empty. This Cátedra is an excellent calling card for the University of Coimbra when it comes to interacting with partners in the subject of labor. This Cátedra also contributes to the internationalization efforts of our faculty and to the advancement of knowledge and policy on work, employment, and social justice. My background is mathematics, as some of you may know, and despite that, the subject of the two talks that we will listen in a little bit catch my attention because they are indeed interdisciplinary. Although Cristiano Ronaldo failed to score in Qatar, and we have to have him in the team again in the next World Cup, at least, I think what we will hear will please us all. So have a good session. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all. First of all, thank you to the Vice Dean Humberto Rocha, Professor Humberto Rocha. Thank you to Dr. Mafalda Tronche from the ILO, Lisbon ILO. Thank you, of course, to the speakers, Dr. Houtan and Dr. Pascal Annycke for attending this session. It's a pleasure, it's an honor to have you here again and for this 8th edition of the ILO-Chair. In fact, this has a history. The history of the ILO-Chair was basically started almost 10 years ago when we organized here at the faculty the simulation of International Labour Conference. And we hosted here at the faculty more than 300 students, basically replying the spirit of ILO. And as a consequence of that simulation, it was the first ever simulation organized in a higher education institution in Europe. We created the ILO-Chair. And the ILO-Chair is basically, as a purpose, I would say the purpose it's quite clear. We are, our purpose, our collective goal is basically to foster interinstitutional cooperation on one hand, at the same time to create more networking, and of course, sharing knowledges, sharing learnings between students, professors, and all the academic community, and especially open the space of the faculty to the external institutions. So this is the purpose. And since then, we have been, this is why, as Professor Humberto Rocha just told us, this is the edition number 8. And in the previous editions, we basically talked of different subjects since 2018 was the first edition. We have talked here about the history of ILO. We have talked here about green jobs. We have talked about international labor standards, digital economy. We have talked about gender pay gap, about decent work and multilateralism. We have talked about the right to disconnect, about economy of care, about industrial sector, automobile sector, about child labor, about labor inspectorate, social protection, and also youth employment. And I'm just trying to select some. I'm not saying all the themes. Social contracts, combat against violence and harassment at work, and finally, this is the present session, the impact of the ILO supervisory system and World Social Protection Report. So we have a lot of themes during these years, and the purpose is precisely to continue on the future. So thank you very much for your presence here, and thank you for the speakers especially. And now I'll give the floor to Dr. Mafalda Tronche to say words. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, Vice Dean of the faculty and Professor Herms and my colleagues and you in the room. It's very good to see a almost full room to follow this debate today. I think it's a good sign, and I hope it's very interesting for you. It's a great honor to again be together with the faculty organizing this 8th edition of the Cátedra that has, or it's a result of much broader relationship that the university has with the ILO. Through this Cátedra, we have been able to promote within the academic community, and I think even beyond it, a reflection on the labor markets, labor world, significant changes that we all experience and witness. So this is a very important contribution of the academia and in particular of the University of Coimbra to this debate. And there are a number of areas that we have been reflecting together that were already mentioned by Professor Herms. And today we are introducing 2 new subjects for discussion. One of them, we will get a chance to better know how the ILO operates in the field in a through a concrete case of technical cooperation. It's the case that my colleague Houtan will present to you, and I'm very grateful for him to have the availability to be with us. This case was very much disseminated worldwide, and it gained a lot of interest in Portugal as well, because it was happening at the same time as the country, Qatar, was preparing himself to host the World Cup. And so there were a number of articles and media focus on this case and on this ILO project as well. Houtan currently is not in Qatar anymore. He's a senior operations specialist at the regional office of the ILO for Europe and Central Asia, but he was the colleague that coordinated this project in Qatar, so you will have the privilege to have direct contact with the person that was in charge of this project and how it continues to endure in the referred country, and as an example also to other countries. We will also have a presentation from my colleague Pascal Annycke on the social protection report. This is a flagship report from the ILO. It's a very important report. The one that Pascal is now presenting reports to the period that goes from this year until 2026. And it makes a link between social protection and climate change and the needs of the transitions and how to protect our workers and their families. So this is quite also a privileged moment to follow this report, because Pascal was also part of it. So you will have on first hand the results of this report. And I also want to thank Pascal for his availability. As you know, the current Director General of the ILO, Gilbert Humboldt, he has been pointing out the need of intensifying the collective efforts to solve with urgency the deficits of social justice worldwide, and accelerate the implementation of the 2030 agenda and the decent work agenda, of course, which is the main mandate of the ILO. And with that aim in view, he has created a global coalition for social justice that brings together all the decisive dimensions of our society that are able to construct together a world where social justice is true to everybody. This coalition is quite relevant. It has a very significant number of partners. And I'm referring these not only because I think the work that we develop is in this spirit, but also because your university is part of this global coalition. And I want not only to thank you, but to underline and give visibility to your contribution to this global coalition. And together with this chair that we have here, I think it demonstrates the commitment of your university with a world that is much more fair in terms of justice, of social justice and decent work. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just come closer to you because I hate hearing myself speak. So I want to have an exchange with you, share my experience with you, and at any time you have any questions, just put your hand up and interrupt me. And if I talk for too long, just tell me to shut up. That's perfectly fine, okay? Let me also thank you for being here today with us. It's a beautiful sunny day. There are beautiful cars apparently racing, rallying around town. So thank you even more for being here with all of us. We're very proud of the partnership that we have with the university. So thank you very much, colleagues, friends, for the invitation. And of course, Mafalda for leading our work here in the country. As you heard, my name is Houtan, and I was asked to go to Qatar to open up an office a few years before the World Cup to work with the government as well as the trade unions and the employers, global but also local, in order to improve the working conditions for migrant workers in the country. But before I start, I'd like to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind. And of course, the professors are taking notes and they're going to grade you for it. No, just joking, don't worry. But who really knows what the ILO does? And don't feel bad, just throw it out there, because after having worked for the ILO for 19 years, I still tell my best friends that I work for the UN because they really have no idea what the ILO does. And I've told them many times. So really don't feel bad. Anyone, what does the International Labour Organization stand for? Any ideas? Anyone? Anyone? No? No one? No? Okay, I'll answer this one and then you have to answer the next one, okay? So, where? Yeah, perfect.
Well, first of all, it is to create a non-discriminatory environment for all of the workers, and it helps to encourage the kind of environment that is for everyone equal. And yeah, that was all I wanted to say.
Perfect. Great, thank you very much. You highlighted some of the most important issues that we deal with, so thank you. Absolutely. Now, I always like to say the ILO is the labor arm of the United Nations. Okay, there is not a single country in the world that has not benefited from the International Labour Organization. If there is a minimum wage law, it's because there is a minimum wage convention that the ILO has. If it's maximum working hours, It's because there is a convention that the ILO has, okay? And when I say the ILO, can you tell me why is the ILO unique even within the UN family? It's the only UN agency that has one thing that no other UN organizations, agencies have. Any ideas? Come on, ChatGPT, use it. ChatGPT, come on, all of you. No? No idea? No? It's tripartite. Okay? You look at the UN Secretariat, the United Nations itself, it only has member states. So the countries that are members of the United Nations get together and decide the strategic direction of the UN. For us, it's pretty much similar setup like this. I think you went through the exercise a few years ago. We have governments in the middle, so the countries that are members, but also then we have on the right the trade unions from those very countries that are there. And on the other side, we have the employers, the chambers of commerce, the employer federations that are there. So this is what we call tripartism. And all the decisions that are made, the strategic vision of the organization, the programming and budget, all these questions that are dealt with are decided by the three group. And this is very much our strength. But you can imagine that only getting member states to agree on something is very complicated itself. Now throwing to the mix, trade unions and employers, it becomes even more complex. But once they agree on a direction, a strategic direction or an issue, then implementation is much easier at the country level, okay? Now, let's go specifically to Qatar. In 2016, I believe that it was, 2012 first, that the trade unions submitted a complaint against Qatar. Another unique aspect of the organization that we have is that we have a complaint mechanism, or the supervisory system, what we call it. So, part of our governing body, they can submit a complaint against a member state that they believe is in violation of one of our standards or conventions that they have ratified. So the trade union submitted a complaint against Qatar, state of Qatar, saying, we have a convention number 29, which is on forced labor. And they said, we believe that Qatar is violating this convention, Convention 29. And a lot of the migrant workers that go to Qatar are being abused, and it's slave labor. That complaint was received, and it went on for a number of years. The governing body asking Qatar to explain and respond to questions related to this specific convention and their legislation in the world of work. And they made changes. It went about 4 or 5 years. They came back and said, no, we're not in violation because of this and this and this. We're making these changes. And again, the governing body went and said, you know what? All the member states, the trade unions and the employers said, no, we don't agree. We think you're still in violation of the Convention 29, which is forced labor. So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And finally, and I'll be honest, if a complaint against a country goes on for too long, it's not good for anyone, including the ILO, because it shows that our system is not effective. So thankfully, this did not go on for a long time. It went on for a couple of years, and then we started to negotiate with Qatar on designing a comprehensive package of labor reforms for Qatar. And the entire world was watching, because it was right before the World Cup, okay? So journalists, NGOs, trade unions, everyone, companies were trying to sign contracts. So everyone was really paying a lot of attention. So this added to the pressure as well. But at the end, Qatar committed to a comprehensive labor reform package for 3 years. And that's when I was asked to go open up the office, put a team together of 17 people, and start really working very hard and quick on making very important changes in actually the labor code. One of the biggest problems that exists in that region is a sponsorship system called the kafala. Kafala, the word in Arabic means really sponsorship. And that is, for example, if I work for you, you want to hire me, you can bring me from whatever country that I'm coming. but I could not leave the country without you approving it. Even if I wanted to go for a weekend to another country, I would have to come and say, can you please let me go? And you say, no, go back to work. No, or you say, yeah, go. If I want to go work for you, I would have to come and say, please, ma'am, can I go work for someone else? And of course, you wouldn't like it. So if you say no, I cannot change. So this sponsorship law was said to have give the employer way too much control over the worker. And that's why they were saying that this is in violation of Convention 29, basically saying this is like slavery. They control your movement, they control you, not only within the labor market, but also geographically within countries. You cannot go out. So that was our number one objective, to try to dismantle kafala. And I'm very proud and happy to say that with the commitment of the government, with the support of other governments, as well as the trade unions and employer federations, and the global trade unions and IOE Employer Federation, with the government, we managed to completely dismantle kafala. What does that mean? Before, if I wanted to go for the weekend to, let's say, Oman, which is a 30 minutes flight, there is an application on my phone as a worker that I would say, I want to go out of the country in 2 days. She would get a little message saying, this worker wants to leave. Do you approve or no? And she would just say yes or no. That complete application was dismantled. So there was no longer any way for her to say, I cannot go. Okay, so that was the first part of kafala that we dismantled. The second was the labor market mobility. So if I wanted to go and work for you or for you, she would have to approve. That we also dismantled. So basically, with giving advance notice that you do in Portugal or in many other countries, I would give advance notice, and I would be able to go and work for someone else. These were really revolutionary changes in the labor market. And it was really thanks to the commitment of the government that these changes were able to happen. Because, in many countries, we kick, scream, punch. The trade unions say, you have to change the labor code. There are many things and it doesn't happen. But the political commitment needs to be there. And if it's there, then with all of us working together, it can happen. It can happen. Now, I'm not going to stand here in front of you and say that the situation in the labor market in Qatar is perfect or close to it. No, there is no labor market in the world that is perfect. But I am here and I can tell you, as I've been there and I've witnessed it, that it has improved hugely. There was a huge reform that happened. Other initiatives that we did. Before, there was really no minimum wage for migrant workers. Within, bullet speed, working with the government and international trade unions again and employers and the Chamber of Commerce locally and the Ministry of Labor, the government established the minimum wage. Okay, the German ambassador used to always joke with me, saying, in Germany it took us 15 years to establish a minimum wage, and no one is still happy with it. Everyone's still unhappy. In Qatar, we did it in 6 months. Okay, and of course, not everyone was happy with it, but still, it was 6 months. So as you can see, a lot of things happened during the first 3 years that we started to work there. And again, the agreement was for the ILO to be there for 3 years. At the end of the third year, the big question that all the journalists would ask me, the New York Times, BBC, CNN, was, maybe Qatar, because the World Cup was in 4.5 years, as soon as the World Cup happens and the first 3 years is done, do you think they would continue? And I would say, yes, really, what I see when I discuss with the Prime Minister, with the ministers, I see that they're really committed to these changes. And of course, some believed it, some didn't. But now I can stand in front of you and say, how many years now? 8 years? Yeah, 8 years on, our office still exists and the team is still there. And now it's becoming a permanent country office in Qatar. So the commitment has continued. They're still supporting the government and the stakeholders on a series of reforms. So a lot has been happening. You may have seen during the World Cup, there was a lot of coverage on labor rights, and especially leading up to it. Housing. of migrant workers, working during hot summer times. We also did a lot of work on that. For example, we agreed with a number of workers on the construction site and in the farm. They took a small pill and we measured their body temperature second by second to see the impact of the weather conditions on workers. This had never been done. It was a partnership with a university from Greece that has a special unit within the university that does these kinds of research. Of course, there was a legislation that was not as strict as it is now, that would say, if temperature raises after a certain degree, then all work has to stop. Now that has even become more strict, and the temperature, the working hours is all banned. So great reforms have happened and continue to happen. Of course, it's wonderful to have beautifully written laws, but if they're not respected and enforced, then there is no point to it. So another focus of the ILO collaboration with the state of Qatar has been really to help them make sure that these new legislations are enforced and respected. There was another issue that there was a huge backlog of workers' complaints. I haven't been paid. She hasn't paid me for 6 months. You shouldn't have sat here, sorry. You haven't paid me, I want my salary. Where do I go? I go submit a complaint to the Ministry of Labor. It would take 9 months. So they created these little, let's say, instead of a major court that is very time consuming and there's a backlog of cases, they started to have kind of labor courts, if you want, with the judge and Ministry of Labor representatives. So really they started to deal with these complaints very, very quickly and be able to process it, okay? We also had the mandate at the ILO office, which is very unique because we usually don't have that wherever we have a country office. The only other country that I'm aware of was Myanmar, where workers, I as a worker in Qatar, I could go walk into the office and say, hello, my name is Houtan and I'd like to submit a complaint against my employer. And myself, as the head of the office, I had one person just receiving the complaints. They would give it to me, I would review it, and then I would take that to the Minister of Labor directly and say, listen, we have received this as the latest complaint. What are we going to do about it? So this also was showing that really we are there getting information firsthand from the workers themselves to see if all these legislative changes are actually working. They are changing the situation. They are really achieving the results that they aim to have, but also helping workers resolve their cases much more quicker. This was done in parallel as the different courts were set up, as I told you. And this was in a way for us to make sure that the two feed in together and it becomes a sustainable system for the country. Because if the ILO stops receiving complaints, then if we haven't worked on a national process, then everything falls apart anyways. So everything that we did, and we continue to do, we try to make sure that it's sustainable. Okay? So this is just a very quick snapshot of the work that we did in the very first 3 years of our presence in Doha. How much more time do I have? 15 minutes, okay, perfect. Now, do you have any questions up to this point or not? No? Okay, let me go back to another question for you. What do you think is the percentage of locals, the local population in Qatar, compared to migrant workers? Guess percentages. Tell me, 50-50. Anyone? This one I'm
15%
15%.
of national.
15% nationals, 85% migrant workers. You have ChatGPT, no? That's precisely it. Of course, it varies a little bit, but can you imagine? I hear you're from Georgia, right? There are many people here from different countries, from Germany, Portugal. What else do we have? Which other countries do we have? Brazil. Which one? What other countries? Slovakia. Can you imagine living in your own country and only forming 15% of the entire population of the country? Being outnumbered by 85%. Well, that's the case in Qatar. It's very unique. In the other Gulf countries, like Emirates, like Saudi, like Oman, you have a huge population of migrant workers as well, but none of them to this extent that they're so outnumber the local population. Okay? And that is a huge consideration when looking to implement legislative reforms linked to the labor market. Because one of the number one complaints that I always got from Qataris was, the ILO, all you care about is the migrant workers. How about us? How about our rights? And this became a joke eventually, because the local population is very lucky. They have a country that has oil, that has gas, and the Emir of Qatar has set up a system where the locals are very wealthy and benefit hugely from the natural resources, so they're well off. And that's why I was saying, I would tell them, well, what would you like us to do for you? Tell us, because this is also a learning experience for the organization. We had never worked in a country where the local population was outnumbered so hugely. And then they would say, oh yeah, we also want to make sure that we have really good jobs. We also want protection. So, this dialogue continued. And I can tell you that the Emir also in parallel had started a process called the Qatarization, which was precisely that, to make sure that the Qataris have high positions in private sector, in the government, of course. So that was happening in parallel. But I can tell you that during the 3 years and 1 month that I was in Doha, everybody was unhappy with me. Amnesty International was thinking that we're not fighting hard enough. The journalists were saying, oh, the ILO is being corrupt, you're whitewashing just before the World Cup. The Chamber of Commerce was saying, oh, you don't care about our businesses, all these laws that you're promoting are bankrupting our companies. Who else? No one was happy. Really, no one. I used to have an afro before I went to, huge curly long hair. 3 years, 1 month after, I lost it. No, it's not true. I never had hair. It's not true. But just to tell you that, and that's when I knew we were doing something right. And that really comforted me, when no one's happy. When everyone's happy, there's something wrong, I think. It's impossible. Really. I in a situation, you would start questioning, like, everyone's happy? It's idealistic, huh? But so everyone was unhappy. But, the governing body of the ILO, which I told you is tripartite, trade unions, governments, and employers, asked me to report to them every year, once a year, for me to go to Geneva from Doha and report to them and answer any question that they have. This way, they stayed on top of progress in Qatar. So, the first year I went, there was a lot of questions about what's happening, the commitment of the government, the second year, the third year. But what I can tell you is that at the end, they unanimously were extremely happy and satisfied with the progress that was made in Qatar. Again, the credit should not go to the ILO. Really, we're there to serve our constituents and member states. We're not there for the glory or to take the credit. And again, if there was no political commitment from the government, none of this would have happened. Okay, so it's really important, and I hope, of course, our talk today is so exciting that you leave today, you're like, you know what? I want to join the ILO. I want to work for the International Labor Organization. And then you join us and you help us do what we try to do around the world. We have 187 member states, and we have wonderful projects from fighting child labor to slavery to, in Amazon in Brazil, I've done a lot of work there. Wonderful work with the constituents in Brazil, to setting up minimum wage, to making sure that there is maternity protection, making sure that all workers, even in the informal economy, are protected. So really, if there's one thing that I can leave you with today here, is hopefully, you got a bit interested in our organization and what we do, because we need the younger generation to join us, especially given the context of the global landscape that is very quickly shifting and changing, especially when it comes to humanitarian work and human rights. So I'll stop there. Again, thanks for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions, I think at the end or now at the end. So thank you very much.
Before passing the floor to Pascal, I forgot to mention. I'm so sorry, Pascal. Pascal is one of our main social protection specialists. He's now based in Budapest, although he covers the countries that are covered by the office in Moscow. And he has a wide experience within the ILO, and he was part of this report that he is now going to present to you.
Boa tarde. No, boa tarde. Tudo bem? Okay, I will stop there, otherwise we won't go very far. First of all, thanks to the University of Coimbra, professors and students for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here. And thanks also for our colleague from ILO Portugal. When I was invited to come, I prepared 28 slides, And yesterday, talking to the colleagues, I was thinking, well, that will be super boring for the students. So maybe we don't go through the 28 slides. Do you agree? And once again, same as Houtan, let's have interactions. I think I may send some ideas to you through this presentation, and I will also get a lot of ideas from yourself as well. So as Mafalda mentioned, I work as a social protection specialist for the ILO, and in the ILO we have this so-called decent work agenda, in which social protection is part of it. It's, let's say, an important dimension in what we call the world of work. And I will try to, first of all, start with what is social protection, and I will ask you this question. So, beyond, does it work? Okay. So, for you, what is social protection? Can you please tell me? You can also go on ChatGPT or Google or whatever. What is social protection? Do you have any ideas? As a student yourself, do you have any social protection? Or we call it also social security. Yes. Go ahead. No, by the way, don't be shy. I should be the one who should be shy, yeah? So please, I'm listening to you. True. It can be part of social protection, like your housing allowance. Yeah, you may get some cash to pay some of your expenditure. So social protection is a lot about, let's say, cash transfer. That's a very big component. And I'm sure as students, you have other social protection. Any other ideas? What happened to you if you have to go to the doctor, or I don't wish you that, or to the hospital? What happened to you? Do you have any social protection? Sorry? I can't. Yes, exactly. So insurance is a big part of social protection. In many cases, you may have either a compulsory insurance, you could have a voluntary insurance, or you could have mechanism organized by the state, such as universal social protection. Okay, so in the ILO definition, if you want, of social protection, we follow what we call the life cycle approach. Okay, and let's say the first are on this line are the children. So there is the so-called child benefit. Okay, family with children have extra expenditure. So to protect this family, you can put in place a system which will provide child benefit. Okay, and then you have the protection during the working age period. So working age periods, what can happen? You could have, for instance, maternity benefit. You could have unemployment benefit. And you could face other type of risk. You could face, for instance, what we call work injury. So all these risks are what we consider to cover within a social protection system. And I go beyond that. After working age, you would have the pension system for the elderly. Either your parents or grandparents may benefit of a pension. Okay, so this is part also of a social protection system. And what do we need all is also not only for children, adult, or all the elderly, we all need, of course, health care, health protection. So a system in place with doctors, hospital, medicine, and so on, you know. So you need to have all that, to have a comprehensive social protection system, okay? And this is an instrument which is very important to protect everyone from poverty and exclusion. So when you have this mechanism in place, you fight against poverty at the same time and inequalities. So social protection has been considered and used by government under tripartite negotiation. They've been used as instrument to fight against poverty, to fight against inequality when redistributing some of the income from the rich to the poor, from the healthy to the people who are sick, and so on. Just on that slide, I want to mention that all these branches are defined under the ILO Convention 102. And this convention is very old. It's from 1952. Imagine. So it's from 1952, and many countries, they do not have such a comprehensive system with all these branches. So our, let's say, our daily work in my small department working on social protection is trying to support countries who want to extend their social protection system, who want to improve their social protection system. Now a question to you. This convention is, as I told you, is a bit old. If it was drafted today, what would be different? What do you think in that convention, if it was today, what would change? We have 9 social security branches, okay? For children, okay, child allowance. For adult, maternity benefits, what we call cash sickness benefit, meaning if you fall sick, you still receive your salary for an insurance mechanism. Unemployment benefit if you lose your job. Work injury, you lose or you break your arm at work, you still receive cash. You have also some access to healthcare and so on. Invalidity, your injury may not be at work, but in daily life. Survivor benefit, it's if like what we call the main breadwinner of a family die, then you have maybe some benefit for the children. You would have also benefit for the widow of widower, so that the children can continue to go to school and so on. Old age pension and healthcare. So what would be different, please? Refugee protection could be, or migrant protection could be something interesting. However, in the legislation, when you draft, for instance, a law for the pension, if the migrant came during these working years, there is no reason that he would be excluded during his working years from the pension system. But it's true, it would be important to make sure that in the legislation, all these benefits could be also including the migrant and refugees. It's true that with climate change, there are new risks. You have all these natural disasters, and this is not necessarily covered by this program. So you could have specific program related to natural disaster. Yeah, very good. Any other ideas? So maybe that would be beyond social protection as such, but it would be a very interesting mechanism which exists in some countries, such as in the US, like when you launch a recruitment, you may have a preferential recruitment process for people from minorities, because they may not have had access to education, or they may not have had all the same opportunities. But this would be probably more related to employment than social protection. I was thinking in particular about paternity benefit. Many countries today, they would have both maternity and paternity. When that was drafted 70 years ago, there was as such not many men who would take leave related to newborn. So paternity is a new issue. Another new issue is what we call the long-term dependency, you know, or the fourth age, because the old age pension has been designed usually for the third age, you know, 60, 65, 67 now in Portugal. Well, you know, so when these people retire, they are still full of capacity most of the time, you know. But now you have so many people going beyond 90 and so on, who at some point they are dependent. So you need to think about how to organize also this latest year of your life, and have somehow lots of new type of expenditure, which have this special house, medical house, and so on, you know. Okay. I've been too long already on that slide. So
In Portugal, it's called parental leave.
parental leave.
Both mothers and
Okay. So from the latest World Social Protection Report, so as Mafalda mentioned, we collect actually data all over the world in terms of coverage, how many people are covered, how many people are excluded from this program that I have just shown you. You know, the typology with the 9 social security branches. So we collect on all the programs per country, and we, with all these statistics, we come with global data. Okay, so you see that when I suppose you all heard about the SDGs, huh? Yeah. Okay. So under the SDG 1 of related to poverty, there is the target 1.3 related to social protection, because social protection, as I told you, has been identified as a key instrument to fight against poverty. So basically, we are at the ILO, we are in charge of monitoring this UN SDG target 1.3, and we are collecting data worldwide to see the evolution of social security, social protection coverage. So you can see that when we started that in 2015, there was about 42.8% of the population covered by social protection mechanism. And 2023, which are the latest, let's say, census of our data, we are reached 52.4%, which is quite a significant increase. 8%, almost 10 percentage point in 8 years. So it's relatively fast. How would you explain that? Do you have any explanation? What happened between 2015 and 2023? You got it. That's one of the explanation. COVID-19, what happened? We received so many requests at the ILO. Countries say, well, look, I have to close down all economic activities. These people have no income. What can I do? Why? Because at that time I was working in Africa. There is no unemployment benefit scheme. There is no so-called cash sickness benefit. So the people who were sick, they had no compensation. The people who lose their job because basically you were not allowed to go to the office or to work, they had no unemployment scheme in place. So all these people suddenly they had no source of income at all. So countries were consulting us, what can I do? How can I start an unemployment scheme? How can I start a cash sickness benefit? And so on. So suddenly the states realized the kind of coverage gap that they have in their system, and they developed some schemes. And also we can say that with the SDGs, as social protection is part of the SDGs, there was also raising awareness, and some countries, even before 2015, they put in their development strategy, they put social protection as a priority. So we could see both schemes which were started before COVID, and then with COVID, suddenly a lot of new schemes, a lot of requests we receive for supporting them in the creation of new scheme. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Am I? No. Oh. Okay, so this is the same data disaggregated by region. And of course, we know that European countries have a much more comprehensive system than other regions of the world. It's not perfect. We still have small gaps. But when you compare with Africa, where the coverage is below 20% of the population, you see that in such countries, there are much more support, let's say, from ILO, but not only, also from a country like Portugal, because these countries, in Africa, when they want to put in place a scheme, they always consult us, but they may consult also other countries to check, oh, what are your experience? How did you manage to create a new scheme, and so on? How do you make this scheme comprehensive? How do you make this scheme financially sustainable, and so on? So you see the gaps and where the needs are. And of course, as Houtan said, we have much more activities, I would say, in Africa, Asia, Arab state, but we don't have real activities in Europe because the schemes are already in place. These are also some data, but I don't need to go in all the detail because I don't know where I am in terms of timing. And here you've got a map which also show you the differences between Europe, Northern Africa, and for instance, Africa, which is in light colors where the coverage is really low. So that was, let's say, general data on social protection coverage, the trends, and so on. Now, what I want to tell you, like the World Social Protection Report comes out every 3 years, and the previous one was actually on COVID-19, and the current, the one we just produced last autumn is actually the topic covered was mainly related to climate change. So how do you think that social protection can play a role when it comes to climate change? Do you have any idea what would be the role of social protection? Anyone wants to throw an idea here?
We have somebody there.
Please.
Well, as our colleague mentioned before about some environmental disasters, cover, for example, some laws that the family or the person might suffer.
No, that's true. That's of course, as I told you, social protection. The main purpose is to cover some risk. Okay, so we have a mathematician here, and he will immediately understand. So basically, the risk can happen to a limited number of people, but then in an insurance mechanism, the principle is that you pool the risk between the large number. So the more people you contributing, the more chance you will have the opportunity to cover risk, you know? So this is mathematics, and that's actually social protection. It doesn't appear to be with mathematics, but the functioning system are based on good mathematician leading these the schemes. So this is true. However, one of the challenge we have is the predictability. And it's very hard today to predict, for instance, an earthquake, you know, and the consequences of an earthquake. While if I talk about, for instance, old age pension, the predictability is much higher. You can say within a cohort or a group of person within a certain number of, let's say, a group age of a cohort of 5 years, sorry. So people, for instance, from 50 to 55, you can guess relatively well how many of them will retire in 10 years' time. That's with all the data on life expectancy and so on, you can guess. We are not so good yet to predict climate change, and that's a big challenge for social protection system. But there is a big need that you identified, both of you, but what I'm saying also, at the same time, what is important with social protection and climate change is that, as I mentioned, there is, for instance, healthcare. We know that more people will suffer from different kind of sickness due to climate change. You know, Houtan was mentioning in his presentation that there was heat waves in Qatar, but nowadays you also have heat waves in Europe. So this will affect our health system, and this will affect the frequency of a risk, meaning you would have more people affected by sickness, by maybe some type of work injury and so on, than in the past. So there is additional need, I would say, of social protection mechanism with climate change. It comes to your point. There was another hand, or yeah.
I was saying that it was dealing with some voices to homeless people who became temporarily homeless with the climate disasters.
Yeah, and this is very important because we could also, you know, I show you 9 branches of social security, and your colleague was mentioning that among the social protection I have, for instance, housing help. You know, I have subsidized housing. So this is also an additional source of expenditure for social protection system. The fact that you may lose everything, and we will see with some country examples, as we saw, for instance, the floods, flooding in Indonesia and so on. There were some social protection mechanism in place. For instance, the social security institution, what they did, they pay in advance the pension, okay, for the old age pensioner. They pay in advance 3 or 4 months. So with this cash, they could already cover some of the restoration of the house and so on, you know. So the social protection system have to kind of be more responsive compared to what they used to do. With social protection, with climate change, we can also say that what in the different studies that have been done, that of course unemployment is also a big risk. You know, what we notice, for instance, is that in the agriculture sector, with a drought and so on, lots of farmers may lose their job and so on. But you would have, at the end, what has been measured is that you would have a positive effect of climate change, or let's say green transition. At the end, you would have more job created than job loss. So it's also something interesting in the sense that what are the needs is also the transition, help the people to adapt to new employment. And in one of my next slide, you see, for instance, this guy who is working on solar panel. 20 years ago, this job did not exist. There was no solar panel. But with the climate change, now we are adapting to a new world of work, and maybe his family member were farmers or working in construction sector and so on. But in the future jobs, for instance, you have the production of solar panel, you have the installation of this solar panel. But what does it mean? It means at the same time, this creates a lot of stress on the job market. My dad did the same job for 40 years. Maybe yours too. No? No? Well, what do I mean? There was much more predictability on the job market some decades ago. Now, someone who starts his career is most likely going to change job within 5 or 10 years. What does it mean? It means you need to have in place, for instance, an unemployment insurance system. So when you lose your job, you would still have at least some income security. You will survive. You will not fall in poverty. You will not have to sell your car or your house to survive. But at the same time, this cash transfer, this unemployment benefit is not enough. You need to have in place what we call active labor market policy, meaning you need to have in place a system which will enable you to reskill. So you would have all these mechanisms which will train you for the job of tomorrow. And this is important. Social protection on its own is not sufficient. You know, the cash transfer is one thing. You need to adapt to the labor market. So this reskill mechanism is also super important. And I don't know, that might be a subject for your future studies, for instance. I would love to study more on that, but you know, how people adapt to the labor market, how the institution in place facilitate the transition from one job to another. So this is super important to have in place what we call these active labor market policies. Voilà. I don't know if I have more time or 5 minutes. Okay, I wanted to talk about another topic. I always go in the wrong direction. Sorry. So I put some examples, some country examples, in case, as you mentioned, what happened in case there is a flooding, an earthquake, and so on. So there are a few country examples here in the slide. I wanted also to talk with you on something super important, is the what we call how to finance social protection, or the so-called fiscal space for social protection. So basically, when we talk about fiscal space, you could use that term for almost any public sector, you know? You could say, what about fiscal space for education? Basically, is how much will you spend from, let's say, the public expenditure, how much will you spend in one specific area? So education is super important, health is super important. Some countries today, I'm sure in the news you heard that some countries, they want to put military expenditure, they want to increase military expenditure. So what does it mean? At some point, you need to have an arbitrage between all these source of expenditure. And social protection is an important part in, let's say, in European countries. And in this slide, you see how is disaggregated a national budget. You would see that there are the tax revenues, but you also have a so-called social insurance contribution. And then among the tax, what are the different tax? You know, you have, for instance, VAT, but you could have also, of course, tax on profit, on enterprise, and so on. So all these different tax, they constitute a national budget. And the next question, when you have a national budget, how do you spend it? Okay, so when it comes to social protection, we have two main mechanisms. We have a contributory systems, which are based on, as it says, social insurance contribution. And we have a non-contributory system, which are based on tax. Okay? So that's how you finance social protection. And usually when you have a contributory mechanism in place, so you pay, for instance, a certain number of your salary for health insurance, for pension, and so on, you would receive benefit directly related to your contribution. Okay? When a non-contributory system is in place, you have a different principle. If you this non-contributory, for instance, it's financed by income tax. The income tax you pay does not give you a direct right related to this tax. It goes to the general budget, and then that's, let's say, the government who decide how to allocate. So if it allocates it to the health system, then you would benefit of the health system. But if it allocates it to build a school or building a road, that's another use of the public funds. So this is two different, very different notions, but which can be very complementary. Let me explain. You could have, for instance, what we call a universal health insurance system. So basically, you go to the hospital, there is a health system in place, you don't pay benefit because it's paid already by the non-contributory universal system. It's the state to decide to have a universal healthcare system accessible to everyone. And on top of that, you can decide, okay, I need more than this. So you could have an insurance system, a private insurance or public insurance, it depends. On top of that, to get, let's say, a better protection. Okay? So you can have what we call different pillars combining a better protection. So I invite you maybe also to have a look at this publication, ILO publication on fiscal space for social protection. Now, maybe quickly, last question to you. How would you recommend to extend the so-called fiscal space for social protection? What could be the strategy for a government? If you were sitting in the parliament, what would you recommend to extend social protection in your country? Any idea?
Probably I would do some videos, AI generated of thousands of the people who are seeing all devastated, and people would be more susceptible to fight for the social protection.
Communication. That's very important, actually. That's a very important point. Yeah. Any other idea? Yeah. I can't hear.
New taxes.
Yeah, new taxes, definitely. That's also a good idea. But on what kind of tax would you create?
The
Huh?
richest.
Okay, yeah, that's a very hot topic these days.
Yes.
That's a good idea, yeah. Okay, yeah, actually, these are two of the main ideas. So related to the first one, I would say your idea when you say we need to communicate, because many people, for instance, they don't declare all their income. many people would be what we call in the informal economy, either fully, so they are not recorded at all in the social security system, or partially, so maybe there is a deal between the worker and the employer. Say, okay, I'll pay you the minimum salary, so you have some social protection, but on top of that, I will give you every week, a little bit more. That just keep it for you. We don't pay tax on that. Nobody knows, just between you and me. So, of course, all that does not contribute to the social protection system. And when you don't declare at all, it means also you are not covered, So that's, of course, maybe in the short term, you can see some benefit. You would say, okay, I'll keep the 100 euros that I got. But the day you have to go to the hospital, then you will not be covered and you will have to pay a lot instead of being covered by the social insurance system. So there is this short-term strategy, and it's important, of course, to communicate along the need of social protection and the services that you get. So this is quite important, and it's also a challenge because when you're starting your first job, maybe in a couple of years for you, I don't know. Maybe you don't even, why should I pay now my pension contribution? I may not even, because you heard that the system is in trouble, I may not even benefit from it, So, of course, if you don't contribute now, you would have a little bit more of purchasing power these first years, but when you will come at pension time, you will have a really low pension. So, of course, there is all this understanding of a social protection mechanism, which are not necessarily known, and this is important to have a full communication along the benefit of social protection. So, one of the strategies is to extend this. As I mentioned, we have a contributory social insurance system to make sure that we have all these informal economy workers or people who do not declare their incomes, to make sure that they are either through better communication or more control as well, that we manage to collect the contribution and to extend the social protection system. Another point related to the second intervention, of course, is increasing the tax revenues. So, for instance, it could be tax on the very high income. Many countries have a significant deficit, while at the same time they may have reduced the tax rate on enterprise. On profit. So you would think, on the one hand, we have a deficit, meaning more expenditure than receipt, but we keep reducing our tax base, our receipt. So there might be also some contradiction, and I think that this measure is also very relevant. We see also, for instance, special tax which are directly allocated to social protection. So we call them earmark tax. For instance, I don't know if it's the same in Portugal. I'm French. In France, on the bottle of wine or alcohol, you will see social security contribution. So whenever you buy a bottle of alcohol, I'm not encouraging you to buy alcohol, but whenever you buy a bottle of alcohol, there is a small amount of the payment which goes to the social security system. So these are different kind of tax which can be put in place and which can also generate revenues for a social protection system. We are related to that. There is also all this so-called illicit financial flow, and these are also important because they do not contribute at all to the public public budget, to the national budget. So all these illegal activities, of course, whenever you reduce them, then you are more chance to extend your tax base as well. What we call also the reprioritization of public expenditure, and this is also related to the current debate when I was talking about this government today's, which are saying, oh, we need to spend more on military expenditure. You may have heard, for instance, Trump, who says, oh, the European countries, they don't spend enough on military expenditure, and that's why they need the protection of the US. It cannot continue like that. We want European countries to spend at least 5% of their GDP on military expenditure. And in his previous term, he was also already threatening to exit NATO, mentioning that European countries should spend 2% of their GDP on military expenditure. So what does it mean? If you spend on military, you don't spend on others, on other budget lines. So in this slide, you see that, for instance, social protection, culture, environment, they are the budget line which receive much less than so many other sectors, like, for instance, economic affair. You know, so economic affair, for instance, you may spend to encourage enterprise to develop. You know, or general public expenditure. Of course, maybe the state. You know, you need administration in place and so on. So these represent a lot. And even defense or military is much more receive much more funding than social protection. So this is an arbitrage, but we should keep in mind that education, health, social protection, they are human rights. You know, they are human rights, and we cannot do without without it. So it's important to also for us and for politicians to keep the momentum and to ensure that these sectors are not receiving just peanuts, but they are also under their priorities. So I think I will stay. I can stop here. There are also small other source of extending public expenditure. For instance, in countries where you have large public debt, we know that there are some opportunities also for them to renegotiate, for instance, their public debt. So this is also an opportunity for countries to, let's say, reduce the reimbursement of the debt, which is sometimes very significant, and to spend in other areas. And finally, we should not neglect as well what we call the ODA, Official Development Assistance, from a UN agreement. Developed countries are supposed to reallocate to developing countries 0.7% of their GDP, and very, very few countries actually reach that level of 0.7% of GDP, which is still really low. But only country like Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Germany, Luxembourg are reaching that level, and many other OECD countries are very far below. So this is also the responsibility of developed countries to support the development of developing countries. Thank you very much, and happy to answer your question.
So I think that we have a space for, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes to debate, to questions for the both speakers. So I would say the floor is yours. If you want to say something, you want to make any kind of comment and make any kind of connection with whatever you want to do. We have a micro here. We can share the micro with you. So wants to start? Anyone wants to start? Say something? I could raise one or two questions to each one of the speakers if you want. If doesn't want that anyone wants to raise any question from the audience so far. It's just I would say I'm not saying it's properly questions, but comments in a sense. But for the Houtan, for the first speaker, I would wondering what kind of network was possible to build, especially among the ILO and other labor international institutions about the case of Qatar. This was a matter of ILO only, or if it was any kind of international network based on the representatives of the labor world, labor work and labor around the world. So this would be the first question or comment. But at the same time, you mentioned on the abstract of your presentation, you mentioned several types of levels, of several types of key pillars of participation. You talk about wage protection, labor inspection, establishing employment contracts, combating forced labor, promoting workers' voice and access to justice. What would be the hierarchy in Qatar about all these elements? Would be they would put same together at with the same weight, or eventually there was a difference balance between those key elements? And at the same time, for Pascal, in fact, the issue of social protection, it seems to us that it's raised a lot of dilemmas in a sense that. In fact, on one hand, we have the individual vis-a-vis societal dilemma, because when we talk about social protection, we talk about financial options, and sometimes this depends not only on citizens, but especially on governments, on politicians, on companies. But at the same time, we have other types of dilemmas: voluntary, vis-a-vis mandatory, or let's say proactive or reactive. And you have also mentioned one, which was the predictable and unpredictable. So we have a lots of dilemmas under the process of finding the right solution for social protection. And so I was wondering what was in terms of the ILO. At the same time, it seems there is a cross between different types of rights, because you have mentioned here, after some questions from the audience, that social protection is related with something, but at the same time you have also talked about employment protection. So, which means that sometimes it's necessary to make a certain kind of a mismatch or a dialogue between different types of rights on which the ILO is based on. Which means that it seems that what is the role, what is the weight of social protection within the policies of the ILO? Because on the one hand, it seems that we can make connections with different kinds of policies, but on the same time, I was wondering what was the weight of the social protection policies within the ILO. Is it possible to make a scale of priorities within the ILO? Because in fact, you have just finished with your presentation about the fiscal space, and especially about the trends of the governments related with the military expenditure. In fact, not only, of course, Trump just created this wave of investing in and putting the world against, let's just say, commercial war in a sense. But in fact, what we listen in Europe is that governments are seems that they are more and more concerned about the issues of war, and so the priority of the political will of the governments seems to be reoriented to other kinds of priorities instead of social protection. So this should be unavoidable or not? I don't know. How could you say something about this or not? Sorry, but I was not supposed to say much more, but please, we can also have a space for any more comments from the audience. Okay, anyone wants to? I think they're okay.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Houtan, and because you explained that this changing process was so challenging, you were so pressured, and it was so tough to change a law that was so immersed in the country's culture. What was the toughest moment or during these years of change, and what was the most gratifying or happiest moment of this change also?
Thank you. Very good question. Anyone else before we? No? Okay. Should I start answering and then maybe there are more questions? So let me start with yours. One thing that I forgot to mention was there was a certain degree of additional complexity in our work in Qatar because there are no trade unions. So for an organization that in the heart and soul of its governance structure has trade unions, to operate in a country where there are no trade unions, as you can imagine, offers complexities. But operationally speaking, we also needed to create a channel to inform workers directly because there are no trade unions that could help us locally. Of course, the International Trade Union Confederation and other trade unions were heavily involved in the implementation of our program. But since they were not on the ground, we wanted to come up with a very creative way of reaching out to workers, being able to inform them about the legislative changes, the new benefits that concern them, and also get information back from them. So what we did was something that we have never done before, as far as I know, is we created 5 community liaison officer posts in the ILO office. And these individuals were proposed by the different trade unions, different sectors. So we had one representative from the construction trade unions. We had one of, kind of services and hospitality. So these were community liaison officers, not trade unions, because that the country was not ready for yet. And they would be housed in the ILO, and they would report to me as the head of the office, but they would also regularly meet with the Undersecretary of Labor. So really, it was between the ILO and the government to share information with them and to obtain information from them from the respective sectoral sectors, basically. And that's the network of the workers that we created that actually proved to be extremely helpful, and it still continues today. Also with the NGO community like Amnesty, Slavery International, I started to do briefings with them online every few weeks because there were a lot of workers that were also providing information to them directly. So they would share the information, I would share information, we would work together because they were also doing studies on the evolving situation in Qatar. So these are the kind of networks that we created that were very helpful. On your second question about the hierarchy or the importance of the different components of the initial program, I think the most important was dismantling kafala because it had a direct impact on the daily lives of the workers. And that's huge, and that cannot be underestimated, especially when you have so many workers in the country, migrant workers. So, changing these two legislation that I mentioned about the control over the workers impacted right away 2.6 million workers. I mean, that's huge. That's really huge. So I would say that I would put that on the top. Of course, the labor courts, the minimum wage, the labor inspection, all these were all there. And in a way, the way that we designed the program was that all the 5 components were very much complementary. And sorry. I and they were very much complementary. So one really would not advance as much if the other one was lagging behind. Going to answer your question, I think it was a very proud moment for the entire ILO team, as well as the team in the Ministry of Labor that worked with us, the day that the kafala system was dismantled. And if you Google it, you'll see that a lot of articles came out, a lot of analysis about the dismantlement of kafala came out. But again, to be able to contribute to changing a system that works towards addressing the power imbalance between a worker and an employer is extremely rewarding and rare. So I think that's really the most memorable memory I think that we had there. Another one was that one of these complaints that came, we had people from construction to people working for the Qatar Airways, various complaints, engineers even. And another really rewarding experience was that we managed to very quickly get 800 workers that had not been paid for 3 months paid, and their situation immediately improved because the company had gone bankrupt, and they even had no longer food to eat, and they were not getting paid, so they were abandoned because the company had completely gone bankrupt. So also, really sitting down with the workers, being able to get them their lives back together. And then also we work with the ministry to also find jobs for them. So that also is really, really rewarding because you see the impact of your work immediately, But on the other side, I can't stand here and tell you that was a positive resolution. There was a positive resolution to every single complaint that we received. No. Some of them have gone on and on and on because they're very complex. There's the supply chain. This company works for this company. This company hasn't paid that company. So that also continues and is always on our mind that it's unfortunate that we can't help every single worker that reaches out to us.
Is there a system present in other countries as well? If so, what's the impact of COVID in the other countries?
Yeah, it's very, very good question again, and something that I discussed very often, not only with politicians in Qatar and the leadership of the country, but also with the ambassadors. Because I hope, and I used to say it, and we're seeing the impact since, that we created a healthy competition amongst the Gulf countries. And again, I don't know if you remember this, we established the office in a year that the entire Gulf geopolitics changed. There was the blockade. All the neighboring countries basically stopped their relations with Qatar. They did not allow them to use even their airspace. They closed all the land and air borders. And Qatar depended heavily even for food on the neighbors. And this really completely changed the geopolitics. And what I used to always say, I say, listen, trust me, because kafala exists in the region, not just in the Gulf, but in the Middle East. And it's in a way ironic because kafala was not invented by the Gulf countries or the countries of the Middle East. Kafala was brought to the region by the British for security reasons. So it's a British legacy, unfortunately. And I think that's really, really important to remember because many that are not aware of the history, they say, oh, this is the Arabs brought this up or the Gulf countries. No. I think it's very important to remember history. And as soon as kafala was dismantled, other countries had to follow through. And I think Qatar has come the furthest, but other GCC countries in the Gulf have also come with their own reforms to their kafala system, and in various degrees of success. But it has hugely impacted the region, and it's going in the right direction, because in today's world, it no longer makes sense to have such a system.
Thank you. I think there were several questions in one, so I will try not to forget aspect. Come back to me with if I don't cover some of the aspect of your question. But maybe what I didn't insist on enough is the fact that social protection is recognized as a human right, and it is part of the Human Rights Declaration, Article 22. You will see that social protection is identified as a human right. So based on that, at the ILO, we consider that everyone should access social protection, either rich or poor, national or foreigner, and so on. Everyone should be eligible to social protection. So in the convention that I mentioned, ILO Convention 102, called Minimum Standards of Social Protection, we are not talking about, let's say, a super generous social protection system, but let's say the basic, covering the basic needs for the 9 branches that I showed you. What does it mean? This convention is articulated along 3 main dimensions. These minimum benefits, okay? How to contribute or finance to cover this benefit. And for the mathematician that we have here, the long-term financial sustainability of this benefit in place, meaning you measure the expenditure, the receipt, and you make sure that on the long term, your system is sustainable. So somehow, there is no dilemma. There is a human right to achieve for the state. That's, let's say, the minimum basis. And your question about the difficulty of predictability, that's where the mathematics come. You need a good statistical system, good data generation of your system. We recommend also to disaggregate all the information you have by sex, because we know that the risk would be different if you are covering women or men, both related to life expectancy. Women live longer. We were talking about maternity benefit, which is a typical benefit for more for women than men, but we know that more and more countries now have also paternity benefit and so on. So you need, whenever you put in place a social protection system, you need to generate all these statistics which will help you to analyze the scheme. And in the convention as well, a very important point is that you may have contribution from workers and employers in place to finance the system, but as a last resort, it is the responsibility of the state. So it appears very much in the structure of social protection institution. You may have a separate social insurance system, which is a separate body under the responsibility of a ministry. But this social insurance system, it is based on workers' contribution, employers' contribution. These people, they want to see how their money is used. So they sit in a governing body, and every year this governing body has to show how much they receive, how much they spend, how much of the administrative expenditure, and so on. So this is where the tripartism is so important. You need to have on board workers, employers, and government to make sure that you have, as our student mentioned, the good communication. You need to have these workers representative, employers representative to explain to their members what are the use of their contribution. It is not lost. It's there under their ownership, and it is for themselves as well. Whenever comes the time of receiving a pension or receiving healthcare, so that's when people will judge when they access good services or not, and that's when they will receive a good benefit that they will be willing to continue to contribute. So that's one thing. But it's true that the needs can be different. And usually we present the social protection system with different pillars. So this basic pillar, everyone should have a minimum pension, minimum access to certain healthcare and so on. But then if you are, let's say, an executive director in a company, your expectation at time of pension might be higher than if you are just a cashier in a supermarket. Okay, so you would have what we call a pillar system, and on top of a basic system, you would have maybe an enterprise negotiated system for the white collar worker and so on. So you may have this kind of pyramid in terms of protection, and on the very top you may have also these, as you mentioned, voluntary schemes. But from our experience, because we tried also to implement voluntary schemes, when it comes to social protection, it doesn't work. Why? Because, as I mentioned, social protection is related to this idea of risk. And if you are not sick today, you will not necessarily contribute to your health insurance because you think, I'm in good health today, why should I contribute? But when you are sick, or the same for if you have a car, if the insurance of your car is not mandatory, you will not necessarily insure your car because you think, I won't have an accident. But, when the accident comes, it's too late if you haven't been insured, So it's the same with social protection. It's the same with this idea of risk. If you don't make a social protection system mandatory, the people will keep it aside. They won't contribute because they will always think of this very short-term priority. I need to buy this, I need to buy that, but the social insurance, okay, I'll contribute next month, next year, and so on. So we have experimented voluntary health mutual insurance in Africa, in villages, and the people come to insure themselves when the kid is already sick. It doesn't work. Then what does it mean? You only cover the bad risk. And this is against the principle of insurance, which I told you pool the risk, so everyone contributes, and the 2% of the population which is sick, they will benefit of a contribution of 98% of the population. So this is one thing that we tried, We experimented in many countries. Voluntary doesn't work, so we have to opt for a mandatory scheme. Did I answer your question?
It's very quick. I won't take much of your time, but we had a discussion here as in other countries on the possibility of taxing robots or machines to get a wider fiscal space for social protection. For instance, when a machine replaces a worker's place, we have this system in the highways called Green Way, in which we don't have people collecting money anymore. It's just a machine we pass and they charge us. So a part of that money that these charges could go and go to the budget of the social protection. Yes, is the ILO, this is something that the ILO is looking at as well, or is just some random ideas that we are having? And the other one has to do with young people, because for some generations now that they are living many crises. They are facing fragmented careers with very low salaries, and of course, this will impact their pension when they go to retirement. So, is this being also considered when we shape the social protection system in a way that they are protected in the future and don't become very low pensioners and, well, with much difficult life than they already have? Because, by the way, we have given technical support to a National Committee on the Sustainability of Social Security. And under that work, we made an inquiry with young people, and surprisingly, the vast majority believes in the system. What they do not believe that they will benefit from it, which is quite different.
Anyone has an answer? Or
I have a provocative one.
she has also, huh? She had
Yeah.
also, huh?
It's related. I think it's quite easy to tax income, and everybody do that. What about taxing wealth? We only do that in housing, basically.
Yeah, Tobin. Ask the question to Tobin. No? Okay, so the question about the robot. Okay, we have some mechanism to tax the robot, at least indirect mechanism. So somehow when you replace manpower by robots, well, what is expected? Usually it's expected that you would somehow increase your productivity. Yeah? And you would increase your productivity, your competitiveness, and you would increase your profit. So we are supposed to tax profit. And as I mentioned, as I show the general budget, this should be an important contribution to the general budget, and it will be the role of the state to allocate some share of his budget to social protection. At the same time, as I mentioned, as I show this example of this guy working on a solar panel, what will happen? This person was, or this group of person who have lost their job in maybe the chain and being replaced by the robot, they need to have access to a, let's say, a good reskilling system, and they would maybe be the next generation of people who would produce the robot, meaning the economy will change, and they would need, of course, it takes time, but they would need to adapt to the labor market, at least, and to use their manpower on new segment of the labor market. So it takes time, and that's why these people, they don't need only cash. They need also access to all this reskilling mechanism, TVET, university. Maybe they need to go back and to access their future job after. So for the tax, so it's all this idea of transition, and the fact that we're not going to do the same job for the rest of our life. Concerning the taxation of wealth, this is, I think, a big issue. Many people have been working on that, especially now the OECD has been working on taxation of wealth worldwide. So they are negotiating now for minimum tax rate globally. So they are, all these countries where you have almost zero tax rate. They have been not yet on a compulsory basis, but they have created a lot of incentive and pressure to make sure that there is minimum tax rate implemented globally. So this is one option. But of course, all this financial transaction, there are some opportunities with digitalization. There are some opportunities to tax them as well, So maybe I think we have to consider that, as we know that it's becoming easier and easier to transfer your wealth from one country to another, from one day to the other, and you see a lot of arbitrage every day. This is a big challenge for our countries, but they need to coordinate. And Tobin tax is not new. It's been, I think Tobin launched this idea about 30 years ago, or maybe even more. I think there will be in the future more tax going in that sense. Yeah.
So thank you all again. I think it was a very interesting discussion overall. I would like to thank all of you for being here, and particularly the two speakers. Thank you.